Good evening.
Good evening.
We are so glad you were here at the Fort Worth Public Library tonight. I'm Marilyn Marvin, Acting Director for the library, and our library's vision is to be a community gathering place for learning, self-discovery, shared experiences, and personal growth, and that's what we believe we're doing here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to say thank you to Councilmember Elizabeth Beck for being here this evening. And it is my pleasure to introduce the head of our local History and Archives unit, Linda Barrett.
Thank you. So I first encountered Mr. Dale Long when I read the article telling our stories in the June 2009 issue of Ebony magazine. In the article, Mr. Long spoke about the importance of knowing one's history. He shared that it is proven that young people who are aware of their history are more successful in life than those who don't know their cultural history. I mention this because each year when we pause to remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his brief visit to Fort Worth in 1959 is a subject of discussion. During the visit, Dr. King stayed at the home of Veda Felder. Unfortunately, publicly accessible documentary record of that visit is scarce. Dr. King spoke at the Majestic Theater, but I've never seen a program or a photograph from that event. Tonight, I would like to implore you to help the young people in your life to learn about their history and to teach them to preserve their history so that it can be passed down and shared. So now I'm going to give a brief introduction to Dale Hawkins Long. He was born in Tuskegee, Alabama, and raised in Birmingham, where he graduated from Parker High School in 1970. He accepted a music scholarship and became a member of the famous Ocean of Soul Marching Band of Texas Southern University, where he earned the Bachelor of Science degree in 1974. A resident of Garland, Dale is the former Community Outreach Coordinator, Public Information Officer for the City of Dallas Public Works Department, from which he retired in April of 2018. He is a member of the Garland branch of the NAACP, the Leadership Dallas Alumni Association, Kappa Kappa Psi National Honorary Band Fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, Texas Southern University National Alumni Association Dallas Chapter, and KidsInBirmingham1963.org. For over 4 decades, he has been a mentor with Big Brothers and Big Sisters, receiving numerous awards and recognition for his volunteer service. Dale has been a speaker on the national platform, including the National Urban League, Congressional Black Caucus, and the United Methodist Church's General Conference. In 2004, during the 40th anniversary commemoration of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, President George W. Bush included in his White House addresses one of Dale's childhood memories of growing up in Birmingham. In 2013, at its 50th anniversary, Dale returned to his hometown of Birmingham, joining fellow survivors of the September 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. 4 of his friends were tragically killed and 27 injured. He and his late brother Kenneth escaped unscathed. And now, I will welcome Dale Hawkins Long.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Barrett, and hello, Fort Worth.
Hello.
Good evening to the city of Fort Worth, whose most appropriate mantra is working together to build a strong community. Don't forget that. You probably already know that, but I'm going to go back to that sometimes later. It's my pleasure and my honor to serve as your 2022 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speaker to commemorate and opposed to celebrate what would have been his 93rd birthday. I can't go any further without introducing to you my beautiful wife and my daughter who came here with me to make sure I got here and made sure that I met all of my appointments. And I've had a whirlwind day, a beautiful day in Fort Worth. And so I'm pleased to have them with us. Wave your hand, ladies. And yeah. Birmingham, a critical piece of American history. Note that I said American history, not black history. American history. To some, Dr. King was an African-American minister. To many, he was a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. To countless people, he was a champion of social justice, a civil rights trailblazer. To a few, he was a drum major for peace, justice, and righteousness. To a myriad, he was America's foremost champion of racial reckoning. To a vast majority, he had a dream. To numerous observers, he was a freedom fighter. Fort Worth, I call him a brother, a man of bravery, intellectual depth, exhibiting eloquent oratory genius who cared immensely about the human condition. Oh, by the way, my favorite quote is, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Let me say that again because it has some bearings on today's news. The arc of moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It all began back in Birmingham, and of course, if you study history, you know Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, and it said it was okay to have separate accommodations for black people and white people as long as it was equal. That was in 1896. Birmingham was known as the most thoroughly segregated city in the country. It was the Johannesburg of this country. Schools, housing, jobs, public facilities, buses, all y'all remember Rosa Parks in Montgomery, Alabama, just right down the road, who went to jail because she refused to get out of her seat and give it to a white person because she had had a long day at work and just didn't want to get up and stand while young people took her seat, and she ended up going to jail. It just so happened that the minister at her church was Dr. Martin Luther King, and that was the impetus that got him involved in the movement. Restaurants, movies, amusement parks, television and radio. You know, I didn't see any African-American reporters on television. The only time you saw black people on local TV is when they were in shackles or handcuffs going to jail or going to court. I thought that there was something wrong with that. Many times I would have discussions with my parents about that because they were the ones who were supposed to teach me about what was going on, and they struggled with trying to provide for us something that made sense and not instill within us hate or fear, for that matter. They would continue to try and struggle with the tough questions that Ken and I had, but inevitably my mother would send us next door to our grandmother. We called her Nanny, our maternal grandmother. And she would always talk about growing up in Waycross, Georgia, and going to Clark Atlanta University, and somehow finding her way over to Birmingham and meeting her husband, who was a student at Morehouse and all of that. But it had nothing to do with the question that I was asking: why do they treat black folks so bad in Birmingham? What is wrong with us? Somebody asked me the question, at what age did you realize? Probably 2 years old. Probably 2 or 3 whenever we would go downtown to the department store with my mother. She would warn us, don't ask to go to the bathroom. Don't want a drink of water. You're not going to go to the hamburger place and you can smell the hamburgers cooking, but you couldn't go there. Y'all check this out. Some people don't believe me when I say this. We could not try on shoes. The way we were fitted for shoes is that we would have to take our feet and place them on a piece of paper. My mother would trace the outline of our feet, and she would present that to the attendant. That's how we had to buy shoes in Birmingham. When I would talk about those situations to my mom and then my grandmother, her only answer would be, boys, if you want to overcome this issue of segregation and racism, you must pray, have faith, walk upright, and get a good education. Pray, have faith, walk upright, and get yourselves a good education. There had been bombings all over Birmingham as a means of intimidation led by the Ku Klux Klan. Then you had Bull Connor, who was the commissioner of safety. That meant he was over the police department and the fire department. There were beatings of ministers who dared to try and enroll their kids into public schools. See, Brown versus Board of Education was what, 1958? Well, nothing happened like that in Birmingham till well into the 60s, 1963. I recall a few times when Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth would try and enroll his daughter into Phillips High School, and he would be severely beaten while the police stood there and watched the Klan just beat him up. It was known that the police would give the Klan 5 or 10 minutes to have their way. And maybe after the latest beating, Fred Shuttlesworth would learn his lesson. If you fly into Birmingham right now and land at the airport, you will fly into Fred Shuttlesworth International Airport. All of the bombings that took place in Birmingham in the 50s and so forth was terrifying for me as a young kid growing up. I would hear the bombings when they bombed Arthur Shore's house. He lived on what was known as Dynamite Hill. Oh, by the way, the moniker for Birmingham was Birmingham, not Birmingham, Birmingham. And after all of these things would happen, it was terrifying for Ken and I as young folk. The critical part was there was no counseling. There was no mental health for young folks who were experiencing this daily. Imagine that. We would just, sometimes my brother would lay awake at night talking amongst ourselves in our bedroom about what would happen if they blew up our house. Because every time that they blew up Shore's house, it would shake ours. And we knew that the bombings were getting closer and closer. The role of the church played a significant part during the civil rights movement. Reverend Shuttlesworth was fed up with the beatings that he was getting and the treatment of black people in Birmingham. So he called upon Dr. King to come to Birmingham and help out. Dr. King had run a successful movement in parts of Georgia and down in Montgomery with Rosa Parks. He said, please come to Birmingham and give us a hand. He said, well, why should I come to Birmingham? He said, you know, you're a nationally known figure. Everybody's aware of you. And hopefully you can bring attention, and that attention that they were looking for was the media. They wanted the media in Birmingham to understand what was going on with black folks in Birmingham. So the churches ended up being a gathering place for Dr. King and Reverend Abernathy and Reverend Cross, my minister, to run the rallies of the people who came to Birmingham or the people in Birmingham who chose to participate in the demonstrations. Now, initially, the demonstrations were done by adults. The adults typically would show up at 16th Street Church in the evening. They would hear a great speech, oratory from Dr. King. He would teach them about nonviolence, resistance, no fighting, no cursing. If you had knives and guns and anything that could be considered a weapon, even a fingernail file, drop it in the box. You can't participate with what I'm doing if you're here to do violence. So the first round of demonstrations took place, and typically the singing, I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around and we shall overcome and all of that, the people would leave and come down the steps of 16th Street Church and then go across the street to Kelly Ingram Park. The idea was on the other side of the park, it was City Hall and the county courthouse, and they merely just wanted to go there and kneel and pray and come back into the church, but they never made it that far because Bull Connor, with his vicious dogs and his sticks and caliprods and whatever he could use, he would beat the demonstrators and load them into paddy wagons and take them to jail. Now that posed a very significant problem. If adults were being locked up, who were at home minding the kids? So they changed the strategy. Oh, and the other part of it is when the adults stayed locked up for 2 or 3 days and then got out of jail and went to work, of course their employer knew where they had been. And they said, since you've been out there with that Martin Luther King man, you no longer have a job working here. So Dr. King and the leadership got together and they decided to invite the kids of Birmingham to participate. Now that was a very significant problem for my folks because Dr. King had a brother, A.D. King, who was a pastor of a church in Birmingham. His two sons, Al and Derek, were our best buddies. They were in the same grades as my brother. We were in the same classrooms at Hill School, and we learned about the movement directly from them. By that time, I had learned to admire Dr. King. That was unbelievable. I knew that he was brave. I loved his oratory. And I wanted to meet him so bad. And I remember being at Al and Derek's house over in Ensley, and their mother would say, boys, you got to take that noise outside because Uncle Mel is in his room trying to get some rest. I said, hey, wait a minute. You mean Dr. King is on the other side of this wall? Can I just go in and look at him? Shake his hand, say hello. They said, no, he's trying to get some. You know, I started to do it anyway. But y'all know what would have happened had I done so, huh? I would have got two. Y'all know what two I'm talking about. So I chose not to do that because I didn't want to mess up the opportunity to go hang out with my best friends. But they told us about the movement. They went to the demonstrations. They went to jail. When my friends at school were missing because they were locked up. And I went home and told my parents that I wanted to go too. It was all starting at our church, at 16th Street Church. Why can't I go? But after the jails were filled, they've started to lock up kids in facilities designed for livestock at the fairgrounds. And my mom and dad made the decision that they just wouldn't expose that to that and whatever else was going on at Fair Park and the way we were being treated, or way we would be likely to be treated. So they told us, please don't do it. And they made special attention to me because they knew how bad I wanted to go. I don't think Ken was too interested in it, but I was willing to go. When the kids left 16th Street Church, you've seen the video of it. They went down the steps singing. They crossed the street over to Keller Ingram Park, and they were met by fire hose cannons. Some cases, they would knock little kids clean 15, 20 feet across the park. Dogs attacked them. They were running all over the park. Eugene Bull Connor had a little tank he used to ride around. It was a little white tank, and it was used to clear the street. Nobody would drive that but him. That was his tank. Matter of fact, the police and some of the city officials pretended not to be able to say the word Negro. They said that they couldn't pronounce it. It was too difficult. They would say Negra. You know where they were going with this. At some point, Dr. King and Reverend Abernathy and Shuttlesworth were locked up themselves. And instead of locking them up with everybody else, they put them in solitary confinement. That was designed to play mind games with Dr. King. Oh, don't you forget this. This was the place and the setting where he came up with the famous essay, A Letter from a Birmingham Jail. The way the story goes that he would take little pieces of paper that he found in the jail cell, parts of the newspaper, and write out the essay, and then he would give it to whoever came to visit him, and that person would take it to his secretary, and she would compile it. And basically the reason why he wrote this essay, it was in response to the white ministers of Birmingham who took out a full-page ad in the Birmingham News and said, Dr. King, we know why you're here. We realize that you're doing great work here, but we just ask you to slow down. Give us some time to straighten. Well, how much time do you need? As a matter of fact, that essay that he wrote led to his first book, Why We Can't Wait. Because justice delayed, in most cases, is justice denied. We would have to do a whole nother one of these. Go back and read that essay. I read it every year during this time, just to refresh myself. Because, you know, it's ironic that some of the things that he mentions in A Letter from a Birmingham Jail, he may as well say a letter from the United States of America in this year, because the same things are happening today, and especially here in the state of Texas. In May 11th, 1963, actually on the 12th, my brother and I woke up Sunday morning, as usual. We usually wake up to the aroma of pancakes and sausage and stuff Sunday, getting ready to go to church. But we didn't smell this time. It was something going on in our house that we weren't accustomed to. We knew there were people in the house that normally wouldn't be there. We saw several people pass by our bedroom door. They were white people, white men. One of them stopped and peered into our room, and we noticed that he had a gun on. And my brother and I were trying to figure out what's going on here. We were wise enough to know some of the things that went on in Birmingham, but we were trying to figure out, our parents weren't involved in any of that, and why were they here? And so soon, we struggled. My brother got out of his bed and got into bed with me, because we figured whatever's going on with my parents, we were next. And finally, my mom came in and said, I guess y'all wonder who these people were. She said, yeah, Mom. She said, there are police and FBI and media people. They were here to interview your dad because the A.G. Gaston Motel, where he had a part-time job, was blown up the night before. And he was on the other side of the wall. And all we knew about bombings then was, could he be hurt? Where is he? And my mom said, well, he's fine. He's in there talking to the FBI. She said, no. Go get him and tell him to come in here so we can make sure he's okay. Because we were worried about our dad. And he broke away from his meetings and came in and assured us that he was fine. At the same time of the bombing of the A.G. Gaston Motel, again, this is a block away from 16th Street Church, they bombed A.D. King's house, King's brother's house. That's where our buddies lived. That was their home. And it took us all day before we can get in touch with them to find out they were okay as well, even though it destroyed portions of their home. But they were our buddies, and we needed to know that they were fine. Again, imagine kids, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, living through this kind of stuff, and there was no mental health for Dale and Ken and people like us in the age that we were. The schools were integrated September 4th. There had been several attempts, but a few kids went to the various schools around the city. Matter of fact, the Armstrong brothers who lived behind me, our property was separated by an alley. They integrated Graymont School that was a block away from us. Now, I could see the school from my house, but I couldn't go to school there. Actually, my parents used to vote there. Matter of fact, once I got to be an adult, I used to ask my mom, look, how come every time you went to vote, you would take Ken and I with you? I thought it was a lesson in civics responsibility. And my mom told me, if kids was with us, we were less likely to be humiliated, spat upon, assaulted, talked bad to. I said, yeah, y'all were using us, right? But you know what? What's his name? John Lewis, that was good trouble to be in, even as a young child. But it was a lot of pressure, not just on me, not just on Ken, but all of us, because these are the things that we had to see. You know, it was a tradition in my home to watch the Huntley-Brinkley report. It was a national newscast. Huntley was in D.C., Brinkley was in New York, and they would really tell the story like it was. Matter of fact, y'all know it was Beethoven's some seventh movement, dun, 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 that's the theme song. It would come on, and you couldn't watch anything else in my house. Well, it wasn't before channels anyway. You couldn't watch anything in my house because my parents had to see this. But it's significant that you know that, because this is long before social media entered that. Dr. King was a genius at using the media to show the world what was going on in Birmingham. The demonstrations typically would begin at 9:30 in the morning. The reporters would be there from all over the country shooting their video, and then they would get it on the plane to wherever they needed to send it to in order for the world to see it at the 5, 6 o'clock news. Dr. King was a genius in making sure that the timing was so perfect that he was able to do that. Again, no counseling for black boys and girls, but that was my grandmama, always there, who said, pray, have faith, walk upright, get yourselves a good education. Right after the 4th of September, when the schools integrated, the Armstrong boys lived behind me. Their daddy was a barber, so he couldn't get fired. And his kids integrated that school. Check this out. The FBI sat between the two houses for 2 years, 24 hours. We were the most protected two families on earth. The FBI would walk the Armstrong brothers, Floyd, Dwight, and James, down to the school every day and sit in the classroom with them to protect them. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to sit through that. But they came by and warned my parents too, because we were the same age. And our addresses were similar. They were 208 9th Court, we were 208 9th Avenue West. And they warned us that the Klan didn't care who they got. So my parents needed to keep a careful watch on us. Now, it wasn't until years later that my parents told me about that because they didn't want to frighten us. They figured there was enough pressure on us to have the fear of not being able to stay in your own home safely. So they made a decision not to tell us about that. On September 15, 1963, my mother was a school teacher, and her lesson plans were due the following day. So she dropped us off at Sunday school and went back home to finish her lesson plans, as did many of the teachers who attended 16th Street Church. They would drop the kids off and go back home. That was just for that Sunday, because my mom came to Sunday school also. So I went to my Sunday school class, my brother Ken went to his, and the class I was in was held in the library, in the basement. The kids had Sunday school in the basement. The adult Sunday school classes were up in the main sanctuary of the church. My class was in the library, and it was all boys. We were 11, 12, 13, 14 years old. The Sunday school class had just ended. Oh, as a matter of fact, it was youth day at church. That's where the kids took over the service, reading the scripture, doing the praying, taking up the collection, and my job was to play in the orchestra. The theme for that Sunday was the love that forgives. The love that forgives. We were in the library, and the Sunday school was over, and we were having boy talk. We were talking about who's going to have the best band and who's going to have the best football team, and we were just talking about what boys talk about. It was Sunday school was over. We should have been upstairs with our instruments getting ready for the orchestra thing, but we were just doing the boy thing. And all of a sudden the room started to shake. The lights went out. There was a big bookcase, not perforated wood, real wood, floor to ceiling, full of books, and it was reeling back and forth because the bomb was on that same wall. And the percussion from the explosion caused it to reel back and forth, and luckily it didn't fall over because it would have killed several of us because we were right there in front of it. We had no idea what was going on, but we found ourselves running out of the room and into the open space, the plenary space, and they had folding chairs. I remember running into the chairs that were hitting my shins. Painful. But adrenaline alone said, keep running. Again, it was dark, you couldn't see. We were running into people. We were running into chairs. And I saw this rail light that was leading up from the stairwell that I used to get in and out of church for years. And I knew my way around that church. And so I ran up the stairwell. A police officer met me at the door. Now imagine that the building's still shaking from an explosion. The police meet me at the door. He had both his hands covering the stairwell, and I ran right under his arms, and he said, "Nigga, get back down in there." Now, we were taught to mind the police, but this day I said, I'm gonna make a decision. I'm gonna keep running. And I ran to the outside, and I was standing around for a little bit, and I was still wondering what was going on. It was an overcast day. It was September 15th, cloudy. I could see the pigeons flying around from the church and stuff. It was an old church, and the pigeons were flying around, but he had caught me. I recognized the pungent odor of gunpowder. Now, I guess you're wondering, well, what you know about gunpowder? You're 11 years old. Cap pistols that we all played with when we were little boys, and firecrackers. So I knew how it smelled. And it was so strong that I'd never experienced anything like that. And it dawned on me, they'd blown up the church. Now, they had blown up churches before, but they would do it on Saturday night, Friday night. But this time, it was prime time, 10:30, Sunday morning. What kind of people do that? I thought about it for a little while when I saw people coming down the stairwell and they were being assisted. Adults, some were bleeding, many were crying, and they were just all different. And people were running around looking for their loved ones, and it dawned on me I had not seen my brother. So I made my way back into the basement of the church to look for him. I tried to get into his Sunday school class, and a fireman stopped me. He said, "Son, where are you going?" I said, "I'm looking for my brother. Can I do that?" He said, "Go right ahead." So imagine the fireman telling an 11-year-old boy they can go back into a church that had just been bombed to do a search that he should have been doing. But I went to the Sunday school class where he should have been, and I looked all under the tables, and I called names, and nobody responded, and it was clear to me that no one was there. So I came out of the church, but I remember picking up my clarinet that time, because we were supposed to play in the orchestra. And I grabbed my clarinet, and I came out, and I started frantically looking for him. And there he was. He was there with his Sunday school teacher, Miss Effie McCall. She looked to have about 7 or 8 kids holding on to them all at one time. Many were crying, including my brother, and I was so happy to see him. And I ran up to him to make sure he was okay and hugged him. And Miss McCall wanted me to stay with her at that point. She said, Dale, just stay right here. We'll make sure you get home. I said, no, my dad is up the street working today at the AJ Gas and Motel. I bet you he'll be here in no time. And so I assured her that I could manage this. She had her hands full. And I was being the big 11-year-old brother. And I grabbed my brother by the hand, and we stood there on the corner where we knew my dad would be coming. And I saw him coming down the street. I'd never seen my dad run before. We played softball, he wouldn't run. But he would run in this day. It was the most amazing thing, but when he got to the corner and the police tried to stop him from crossing the street, may have been the same one to stop me, tried to stop me from getting out, he told him one thing, those are my boys, move out of my way. And he came across the street and he hugged us like he had never done before. My dad was not too emotional, but he hugged us. He had no idea what he was going to find when he got to 16th Street Church, because my brother and I joined a club that we didn't sign up for. We have been victims of a bumming. We went, he took us up to his office, and I remember the media being in that little office, the space, the lobby of the AJ Gas and Motel, and they seemed to argue over the payphones. They were trying to report their stories back to wherever they had come from. See, the reporters who were in Birmingham from all over the world weren't welcomed at the Holiday Inns and the Ramada Inns and the traditional, because they would get their equipment torn up and they get assaulted. Because one of the key issues is the people of Birmingham did not want the media to spread that news all over the world. So they had to stay at the AJ Gas and Motel. There was nothing wrong with the place, beautiful place, nice restaurant, sort of comparable to a Holiday Inn, but that was the only place that they could stay. And they were trying to get their story back to wherever they were coming from, and they were arguing over the phone. My dad took us back into his office and attempted several times to call our mom to tell her he had found us and we were okay. See, there was no call waiting, none of that and all of that. We didn't have none of that going on. And so he called next door to my grandmother, and the same thing, the line was busy because people all over the country knew that we went to church there, and they had started to call. Relatives had started to call to make sure we were okay. Finally, he got in touch with her and told us that he had found us, we were okay, and so she jumped in the car. And what should have taken, maybe 10, 12 minutes to drive from our home to the church took about 45 minutes because people were in the streets starting to demonstrate, and it was chaos getting there. But she finally made her way to the breezeway at AG Gas, and she pulled in. I believe she jumped out that car before she put it in park, even though my dad told her we were okay. But you know what a mom does. You know what a mom loves. She had to see for herself. Yeah. So she got out of the car and she ran up to us with tears in her eyes and hugged us and wouldn't turn us loose. Finally, we got into the car and we made our way home. When we got to the house, my grandmother and aunt who lived next door were standing in the front yard. And they wanted to hear our story, what had happened. Explain to us, where were you and what was going on? Who was in the room with you? Are they okay? A few hours later, we found out that 27 people were taken to the hospital. A little bit after that, maybe an hour later, we found out that of the 27 taken to the hospital, 4 were deceased. Then maybe an hour later, we learned that there were 4 precious girls. Addie Collins, Denise McNair, Cynthia Wesley, and Carol Roberson. Incidentally, Denise McNair's mom, Maxine McNair, her funeral was Saturday in Birmingham. She was the last living parent. But she was able to live long enough to see some of the guys who were accused, check this out, 40 years later, of the bombing of the church. Justice delayed is what? Justice denied. But they were able to see justice brought to the situation where their daughter and 3 others lost their lives. There were 2 boys killed, 2 other black kids, black boys killed the same day. The police shot one for throwing rocks. Nothing happened to him. He wasn't even indicted for that. And then check this out, there was another little boy who was shot with a .22 rifle by an Eagle Scout. Little white boy. What'd that make you think of? What's his name? Kyle. Him. Yeah, Eagle Scout. I hope he didn't get a badge for that. But he killed 2 black boys. So 4 black kids lost their lives that day. When we found out that Addie, Denise, Cynthia, and Carol were killed, we were just messed up all over again. We were just hysterical with tears and crying, and we were trying to call the parents because we knew these people. My grandmother got involved again. She was the only counselor I knew that I could count on, and she said, Dale, if you want to deal with this, you pray, have faith, walk upright, get yourself a good education, but don't miss this. She added something this time. She said, God spared you for a reason. Could have been 4 little boys versus 4 little girls, so you need to make up in your mind you're going to do something for somebody else. See, can you come up with a way to have a lifetime of service? I had no idea what that meant until years later. We went on to visit grieving families, and we were buying groceries, taking them to some of the homes, and we were crying and praying with families. And then Carol's funeral was Tuesday at St. John Baptist Church, right around the corner from 16th Street Church. And Dr. King wanted to have a mass funeral, but Carol Robeson's parents had already decided to have it at St. John, that they weren't changing. So Cynthia, Addie, and Denise's funeral was at 6th Avenue Baptist Church Wednesday. Now, I can't remember how I got from Hill School to that church, but by the time I got there, it was so filled with people that the fire department wouldn't let me in. But you can hear Dr. King's eulogy on the PA system. I just wrote some of the excerpts from his eulogy, and I quote, "The killers had their racist ideology nurtured, coddled, and permitted in a society comfortable with notions of white supremacy and black inferiority. The responsibility is on individuals who permit racism to grow through everyday decisions and the accumulation of moral compromises." He continued in saying, "Concerned men and women must reckon with the system, the way of life, the philosophy which produced these murderers." At the end of the funeral and at the end of the eulogy, I stood there, and again, I hadn't been to too many funerals, and so I really didn't, this was new to me, but I stood there and watched 3 caskets brought out of the church by the pallbearers. And I stood there with tears in my eyes because I knew my friends were inside, and they loaded them into the 3 hearses that were sitting there. Then Dr. King led the recessional out with the other ministers, Reverend Ware and Reverend Shuttlesworth and Abernathy and all of them. And Dr. King was standing just as close as you and I were. The most powerful moment of my life. I'm almost 70 years old. I've never experienced a situation like that. Every time I tried to look away, it looked like he was looking right at me. And I want to say it was scary, but it just did something to me. So when I combine spending that moment, I knew that my grandmama was correct, that I had to do something else to serve humanity. Again, Birmingham, a critical piece of American history. Now, the good news, if there's anything good could have come out of this, there were 2 significant things that happened as a result of the Birmingham 16th Street Church: the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Don't y'all miss that. Because here it is 60 years almost later, we still having to go back and deal with it. Justice delayed. It's justice denied. That's why history is so important, because if you don't know it and understand it, you tend to repeat it, huh? That's the first thing I heard when I turned on the TV this morning. We about to repeat some. We are a country who espouses justice, equality, and freedom. It is absolutely critical that our United States Congress signs into law voting rights legislation, including the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the For the People Act. That has to happen immediately. Don't look like it's going to happen before his birthday Monday, but it has to happen because it is critical to our democracy as a people. So we need to write our congresspeople, make phone calls, talk to our friends to make sure that that happens. As I take my seat, I would like to bring attention again to the city of Fort Worth's mantra, working together to build a strong community. I notice a strong parallel, ironically, to the title of Dr. Martin Luther King's 1967 fourth and final book, Advocating for Human Rights, and a sense of hope, which was appropriately entitled, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? I would like to conclude Fort Worth with a quote from that book. And I quote, "Let us be dissatisfied who will no longer have high blood pressure of creeds and anemia of deeds. Let us be dissatisfied until the tragic walls that separate the outer city of wealth and comfort from the inner city of poverty and despair shall be crushed by the battering rams of the fires of justice. Let us be dissatisfied until they who live on the outskirts of hope are brought into the metropolis of daily security. Let us be dissatisfied until slums are cast into the junk heap of history and every family will live in a decent sanitary home. Let us be dissatisfied until the dark yesterdays of segregated schools will be transformed into the bright tomorrows of equality and integrated education." Fort Worth, thank you for listening. Good evening. Bull Connor, let me tell you, he started doing what he was doing as a radio announcer. He called baseball games in Birmingham. Birmingham at the time was going from a commissioner form of government to a mayor-council form of government. When the citizens voted to go to the mayor-council form of government, which meant Bull Connor didn't have a job anymore, he refused to leave. Imagine that. Okay, yeah, y'all know where I'm going, don't start. But he refused to leave. And so finally they figured out a way to get him out of there because he was basically out of office, but he did what he wanted to do. And a few years later, he passed away. But you know, back then you couldn't go talk to the police about anything because they were the Klan too. And it was a pitiful situation. I used to ask my folks all the time, why we live here? You know, when I was exposed to geography and the 7 continents and all that stuff they taught us in the 7th grade, so why we live here? Why don't we just move? And my parents tried to explain how impractical that was, and y'all know what my grandmama said. She said, stay here and deal with it, and we'll get beyond it. Any other questions?
How often do you go back to Birmingham, Alabama? And do you feel as though, if you do go back, do you feel as though, or how do you feel about the progress from then to now in comparison? If that question makes sense.
I was in Birmingham a month ago. There was a film group from London who invited me they flew me to Birmingham to interview me because they were doing a documentary to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the BBC, British Broadcasting Bureau. And so I spent the weekend there. And I didn't get a chance to see very much. Unfortunately, my immediate family all deceased. I wanted to go out to the cemetery and just didn't have time. Because I flew in, did the interview, spent the day at 16th Street Church. It was amazing looking at the church and visiting the lower area where I was because it's now a museum. And so it was kind of eerie standing in the space that I did almost 60 years ago, and then going in and out of that door that I exited. But I go back to Birmingham. I don't go as often now because all my parents are gone and my brother Ken is gone, but you know, COVID kept me from going back to celebrate our 50th high school anniversary, but I'm hoping one of these days they come back up because I miss my friends. Facebook has sort of helped me keep up with stuff going on in Birmingham, and I read the news there all the time, but I go back. Now, it has its problems like just where else. You know, it was a huge white flight in Birmingham. White people live in the suburbs. Even some of my friends who used to live in the hood with me in Smithfield, they live in the suburbs. I don't know how to find their house. When I come to Birmingham, I say, y'all got to come get me because I ain't getting lost out there in Hoover. But I get there every now and then, and I've just not spent any significant time so that I can, you know, see all of my friends and stuff. But it's a very historic, and I would urge you, if you get a chance to go to the Civil Rights Institute. that's right across the street from the church, and it's interesting architecture there because when they start to tell the story about 16th Street Church, there's no picture of it. There's a picture window, and you can look right across the street to the church. Beautiful, amazing idea. And then, of course, you got Kelly Ingram Park right across the street, and I've heard that they're thinking about turning Fifth Avenue to A.G. Gaston Boulevard. He was one of the millionaires, African-American first millionaires in Birmingham. And guess my dad worked for him, and I eventually worked for him over that, working parties and stuff. But it has its problems. They've made some significant improvements. Some of the schools that were there when I was there are no longer there. Parker High School, I call that Parker High School University. It's beautiful. And you have the same dedicated teachers there. Not the same bunch, but the same attitude that made sure that Ken and I got our educations. A good buddy of mine who, if you look him up on he does a TED Talk, Dr. Freeman Robowski. He's about to retire from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. His mother let him demonstrate because his mother took him down to 16th Street to hear Dr. King speak. He said, well, okay, I'm going to come demonstrate. But she told him no, just like my parents did, and he talked her into it. He called his parents hypocrites. Well, I probably would have gotten the first syllable out, hip. And then I probably wouldn't remember the second one. Three, hypocrite. But Freeman tells a similar story that I just told you all about being but he actually went to jail and spent 4 or 5 days there. But he earned his doctorate at 25, and for the last 20 years he's been the president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and produced PhDs that are all over this world. But all of that background came from the dedicated teachers of Birmingham, who made sure that we learned whatever it took, even if we had to use secondhand test tubes and secondhand microscopes and when batteries that didn't work. Give me a break. School desks to when the white kids knew where they were going, they would write messages to us. Y'all know what the messages said. Okay, they knew where they were going, even in the books. That's why it's crazy to talk about books, because our history aren't in those books. The teachers had to teach us about whatever went on in black history. But right now, I'm inclined to say we might want to do away with that, because I like American history. You can't argue with the story I just told you. You can't argue with that, because it's real. And it's up to us to make sure that it doesn't repeat itself. Any other questions?
Got one. Is that building still standing? If so, is it registered as historic?
16th Street Church? Yes, it is. It's still, I was there 2 weeks ago, early in December. Yes, beautiful building. And there's a stained glass window that's about to be refurbished. There was a gift from the people of Wales, England, who donated it maybe a year or two after the bombing. And it didn't dawn on me it's been there that long, but they're about to send in some experts and take the window out and fix it all and put it back in there. The basement of the church where I was when the bombing took place is now a museum. They're still working on it.
Is there anything that's still original? The pews?
Yeah. It's right back to the way it was. I didn't tell y'all that. I was talking to a reporter a couple of days ago, and they said, Dale, are you a preacher? I said, no, most people think I am because I got to look, huh? But thank you. But I explained that after experiencing what I did that week and visiting with those parents and seeing those coffins and peering into the eyes of Dr. King for a few minutes, 2 weeks later, I gave my hand to God. I joined church because I understood the finality of life and what death was, and saw those moms crying and tears and all of that. And something happened. And I used to always ask my grandmama, how do you know when it's time to go do that? And she said, you'll know. So years later, when I found my way, see, I couldn't wait to get away from Birmingham. I thought any place was better than Birmingham. So I got on a plane and went to New Orleans and changed planes. First time I'd ever been on a plane. And changed planes in New Orleans, went to Houston, went to Texas Southern to be in the band. And when I was at TSU, I pledged the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. Dr. King was an Alpha. That's why I wanted to be an Alpha. And I pledged his fraternity. And I was at a frat meeting. Maybe the second one that I ever attended, there was a guy who was in law school. He came and told us about Big Brothers, Big Sisters. And he talked about the mentoring program. He talked about it as a program where they'll place people like myself with kids who don't have a dad. And then you figure out stuff to go do. You know, ball game, fishing, hiking, schoolwork, whatever. And so I signed up for it, and I've been doing it ever since. I'm about to be matched to little brother number 8. I've had 7 over the past few years, and I've enjoyed doing that. And then once I started, I came to the realization that that's what my grandmama was talking about. Doing something for somebody else, because there's a significant value in giving of yourself and being there for a kid who don't have other resources. So if you have the inclination, you have the time, call Big Brothers, Big Sisters. They got one here in Fort Worth. Tell them Dale sent you, and they'll put you to work. Even in COVID, you can get on the phone and call a kid and FaceTime. Y'all can read the same book, watch the same television show. Whether Emmett Till was on last week. It wouldn't be appropriate for a 9-year-old, but a 15, 16-year-old. You know, one of the last movies I took my little brother, the last one I just had, because he just finished high school. What was the movie in Birmingham? In Alabama, about the guy who was in prison and was about to go to death row? By Stevens. Just Mercy, yeah. I took him to see it, but check this out. COVID was just starting when the movie came out, so we sat 3 seats apart and had to plaster. I said, no, you get your own popcorn. But we sat there. But here's the other part. I went and bought the book after I saw the movie, and then I went and bought a book for him. And part of his birthday, I mailed it to him, and we had a discussion about it over the phone. Now he was slick. We discussed it, but see, it was a lot more in that book than was in the film. But the only thing he told me that he read in the book was the stuff that was on the film. So, I'm pretty sure he didn't read it, but maybe one of these days he will pick it up. But you know what? Just for a kid to understand that there's somebody other than his mom that cares about it, it's significant value. So if you can, young folks, I'm looking at y'all over there, go sign up and spend a little time with a kid, and you'll understand the value. And it's fulfilling for you as well. Any other questions? Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for coming. Your words have been so impactful and have been a blessing.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing our history, American history.
Thank you.
And it will reverberate for years to come.
Thank you.
My wife and I have a son. He's 6 years old, and he'd like to ask you a question.
Oh, man, powerful. Come up here and ask it, man. Yeah, because we can't see you. Come on up here. Come on up here. You got something to talk about when you go to school tomorrow. Come on up here. You can ask the question.
Hi, my name is Marcus. Have you ever met Jose Williams, since I'm doing a report on him?
I have not, unfortunately. I remember seeing him in Birmingham. And, you know, from time to time, my dad would bring people who would stay at the A.G. Gaston Motel to the house. I think he brought Dick Gregory by there once, and Harry Belafonte. But not Jose Williams. But I tell you what, I'll give you my card when we're done, and if you need some help doing your research, I'll be glad to help you. We'll look it up, and we'll make it work, okay?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And look here. Man, I am so happy that you came to hear me talk, and it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you, and thank you, parents. Thank you. Any others? Yes?
It seems like recently history is kind of repeating itself with some of the same similar issues, civil rights, and almost kind of evolving into other human rights.
Yes, sir.
What advice would you have to our generation and generations after us to not become morbid or callous with everything that's going on, even though history kind of seems to be repeating itself?
Well, you know, that's a tough question, because that's an individual thing. and I'm not a psychologist, but I will tell you to be determined that you're going to do your part. You make sure you vote. Because when I go out into the community and I talk to young people about voting, it's the folk your age that say, I ain't got time for that. See? And you've got Viola Liuzzo, a white woman that got killed registering people to vote in Alabama. You got the three guys who were, was it Warner, Sherney? Yeah, right. They were killed. You got Medgar Evers that was shot in his driveway the same summer that the Agent Gaston Motel was bombed. You got Dr. King that was killed in '68 in Memphis. All these people lost their lives and more because of the right to vote in many cases. So you gotta be there. You gotta be there for them, and you gotta do it with all determination. I had to work late once. I worked for the Dallas Area Rapid Transit for a little bit on light rail and all of that, and I had to work late, and it dawned on me there was an election going on. And I jumped in my car, and I broke records driving to Garland from downtown. And it was nothing very significant, but I had to make sure that I exercised my right to vote. And so I got in my car and I drove home, and I went to the polling place, and I looked at my watch, and it was 5 minutes after 7. And I ran in there like a madman, and I had to look. And that lady said, we better let that boy vote. Because I understood, and I remember added Denise, Cynthia, and Karen, the two other guys that they lost their lives for me to be able to cast that ballot. So you got to be there, and you got to take folk with you. I'll be marching in the Garland NAACP parade. Somebody texted me and said, boy, did you know it's going to be 28 degrees? I said, yeah, we're going to do it anyway. Maybe the 28 degrees might kill Omicron, you know. But I'll be there passing out voter registration cards in Garland, because I know if there's one person that's not registered, I want to find out who that is and get it into their hands. And so you can do that. Get involved with people who are running for office. You might want to run yourself. You know, go to a city council meeting. You know, when I first moved to Garland, some of the council folks were afraid of me. and I would strategically go pick up a yellow card. That's the card you sign up if you want to talk. And I would pick it up on the outside and walk in and sit on the front row and then fill it out. And the whole council looking, wonder what he want. You know, I just messing with them. but I wanted my presence to be felt, because I get involved in the community, your community. Why are you going to let other people make decisions for you? And I've got good friends that are on the council in Garland, white and black. They're doing a great job. People ask me, why won't you run? That's a lot of work. You get late nights, huh? Late night phone calls and stuff, but people do a tremendous work when they give of themselves and their opportunities. I serve on the board of one of those boards, property management board. That's where we look at homes that need some repair, and if they don't fix them, we fix it for them and charge them for it. So get involved. Find some way to get involved through fraternity, church, school, neighborhood. Get your friends together. Get folks registered, participate. Any other questions? Yes?
Have you read The Watsons Go to Birmingham? And if you have, do you feel like it's very accurate?
The Watsons Go to Birmingham? Not only have I read it, but I've seen the movie. And some of it is fiction. You know, it's a fictional story. It is, yeah, if I recall. Yeah, it is. But it adequately tells the story about what was going on. You know, like, you remember they kept talking about that creek that they kept going to? Something ain't there. I grew up in Birmingham. I couldn't find that place. But it's a very cute little story that gives you an idea of what it was like to grow up in Birmingham. And these Watsons came to Birmingham. They were kind of strangers, you know. And Birmingham was a weird place. Some of the laws. Here's one. I couldn't play checkers with you. We couldn't sit in the park and play checkers, because if I won, something's wrong with that. Black man couldn't dare win. Here's one. You ain't. I'll check. Any of y'all ever heard of reckless eyeballing? You know what it is. Any idea? Here it is. Stand up, young lady, if you don't mind. Just stand up, stand up. Oh, you look very nice today. outfit is beautiful. You look good in that outfit. That's reckless eyeballing. A black man could go to jail and be hung for what I just said. Imagine that. You know, I mentioned earlier that my mom and dad are deceased, and about 15 years ago, I was in the gym trying to lose some of this weight, and somebody talked me into to enrolling into a yoga class. And I thought about it, I said, I can't go in that room with no bunch of white women doing downward dog, man. They'd kill me. And you know, if my dad was still alive and he knew I was doing it, he said, boy, you losing your mind? You know, but a great bunch of people. I continue to do it, great people. We're friends, we've grown lifelong friendship. But here was the deal. They didn't know me. And I explained to them that a matter of survival, I had to understand white people. You didn't have to know nothing about me, but to call the police if you thought I did something out of line, or take care of yourself. But the relationships that I've met just in that room, and most of them white women, we become friends, we celebrate birthdays and send cards when people are sick and go to funerals and all of this stuff, because it's a celebration of the human condition. The problem is they had never dealt with anybody that looked like me, especially African-American male. I joke with them, I say, I know y'all don't know no black folks because I looked on your Facebook page. See? So, any other questions? Well, thank y'all for being here. Thank you so much. Thanks for your questions. Appreciate it. Thank you, young lady. Thank you for letting me scare you to death.